I'm going to be the third one to say thank you this morning for everybody who helped at the block party. Thank you to our missions team. Thank you to Nico for putting so much into organizing it. Thanks to Ruth for all of the behind-the-scenes work that she did. And thank you to everyone who showed up and volunteered. Yesterday was a lot of fun. So thank you for coming out. If you visited with us yesterday and you're here today, I just want to say welcome, and we're glad you're here. But with that, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles to James chapter 1. We're going to talk about suffering and sanctification this morning. Suffering and sanctification out of James 1, verses 2 to 8. I remember hearing this phrase growing up. I don't remember who or where I heard it from, but I remember hearing it. And it's the phrase, no pain, no gain. Maybe you heard that. I seriously cannot remember where I heard it from, whether it was from commercials or a TV show or my friends in fifth grade who thought they were tough. Cannot remember, but it's a phrase that I've heard and that you've probably heard, no pain, no gain. The phrase is rather simple in its idea, and the picture that it gives is if an athlete or a health fanatic does not work hard enough to feel it, to be a little bit sore in the morning after they work out, if they don't meet some resistance and experience some exhaustion, then they're probably not going to see very great gains or results in their workouts and in their efforts and things like that. So no pain, no gain. You got to try hard, go through a little bit of resistance to get results, at least when it comes to working out. So we can maybe say it like this. If you want to get ripped or to lose weight, you'll have to endure a bit of pain to reach your goals, to go through a little bit of suffering to get to where you want to be. In our passage this morning, James is going to tell us something similar, but for spiritual growth, that for spiritual growth to happen sometimes in the Christian life requires a little bit of pain, requires a little bit of suffering, that it's by enduring pain in the form of trials and tribulations that Christians actually gain, actually grow through their sufferings. That's really what's going on in these few verses that we're going to look at. So before we read, I'm going to ask for your help this morning. Throughout the sermon, you're going to hear me say, no pain. And when I say no pain, I want you to say, no gain. All right, so let's practice it a little bit. I want this to stick in your head today. So here we go. No pain. No pain. One more time. No pain. No pain. All right, be watching for it as we go. But that's what we're going to see in this text, along with two facts about the Christian and trial. So let me read for us James chapter 1, starting in verse 2. James writes this, James the half-brother of Jesus. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Let's pray this morning. Lord, I pray that you give us light this morning as we study your word. I pray that you give us clarity. I pray that you would just teach us how to suffer well this morning. Lord, instruct us in your word. Lord, I pray for the person who is going through a trial, who is experiencing persecution, suffering, whatever it might be. Lord, that you would comfort them with these words, that you'd show them where they need to go, that you would push them towards you and towards your wisdom, and that you'd help them to suffer well, that they might experience a little gain in the form of sanctification and growth this morning. So be with us now. Help us to see Christ and lift up Christ's name in this passage. It's in your name I pray. Amen. First fact that we see about the Christian and trial is this. Trial is a joyful opportunity for growth. Trial is a joyful opportunity for growth. And we see this in verses 2 to 4. In verses 2 to 4, James tells his listeners how to see trial and how to respond to trial. He's kind of setting their frame of mind for how to see it, but also how to respond to it whenever it comes to them. Now, the word trial in the New Testament really has two different meanings. There's two expressions of it, two different words for it. One has the idea of temptation, which he's actually going to talk about a little bit further on in this chapter. And the other has the idea of a process of testing, going through something that tests and tries our faith. And that's the idea that we find here in verses 2, 3, and 4. A trial for James could be defined as anything a believer could face that tests their faith, that puts their faith to the test, that puts them under pressure where they will either break or pass the test, because no pain. I almost got you on that one. So it's a blanket statement that covers really anything that you and I might face in our lives that puts the pressure on us. It covers all sorts, all kinds of trials. Anything that turns the temperature up in our lives, the thermostat of our lives, so to speak. The situations that we face that feel weighty and feel pressure-filled, little things and big things. That's what James has in mind here with the idea of trial in verses 2, 3, and 4. So this could include something as small as being worried about a work project or a school assignment or a grade, or something as large as the loss of a loved one or the potential of a scary diagnosis. Covers all sorts of different kinds of trials. Trials are something that we all will face, that we'll all go through, that we'll all come up against at some point in our Christian lives, which is why James says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds." Notice he says when and not if. It's not something that's up in the air that could possibly happen. It's not that you might live a life where you never bump into trial. James anticipates that you will face trial, that you will come up against suffering. So it's not an if, but a when. This is important to catch because it can be easy to fall into kind of a feel-good Christianity belief that being a Christian means ease and comfort, that it means that life is just always better, and it is better in a sense, but that you'll never go through anything. It's not what the New Testament leads us to believe about the Christian life. The Christian life is often hard. We often experience persecutions, trials. We will go through things. So we cannot buy the lie that just because we're a Christian, life gets easier. It gets easier as we follow Christ in a spiritual sense. That doesn't mean we're not going to go through difficult things. Jeff could tell you that, right? After so long of being down with his back. We go through hardship. We buy the lie that being saved and loved by God means life is easy. We will find ourselves in situations where we doubt and question God when life doesn't go our way, right? When we have wrong expectations, thinking God's always going to have us go through the tiptoe through the tulips and things just be good. When things don't go good, it's not very good English, but when things don't go well, you might be tempted to question God. God, why do you let me go through these things? I thought life was supposed to be easier. I thought life was supposed to be better. But here James gives us the expectation that we will face trials. If I believe that being a Christian means exemption from hardship, then when hardship comes, I will be tempted to question and doubt God's goodness. So I'm expecting the wrong things. God, how could you let this happen to me? I thought you loved me. Why would you let me suffer and go through the things that I'm going through in life? But being a Christian does not guarantee the absence of suffering, but it does guarantee God's presence and preservation through suffering, through hardship, through trial, through persecution. The New Testament clearly teaches that Christians are guaranteed to face trial in their lives. In fact, the Bible teaches that trial is a tool in the hand of God to grow believers, to strengthen believers, to refine believers, to remove sin from the lives of believers. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. He says this in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 and 7. You want to just flip over a few pages, you can look there. If not, I'll read it. It says this, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." Trial, testing, difficulty. Peter uses in those words in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, he uses the picture of gold being purified or refined by fire, put into an oven to illustrate that trial, that God uses trial to remove sin and blemish from our lives. That through the fire, things are removed from our lives that ought not to be there. Your trials are a tool in God's hands to remove sin and make you look more like Jesus. God uses trial for our good and for His glory. So you will face trial. The question is whether or not you will see it as a grace and a joy. Whether or not you'll waste your trial. God sovereignly uses trial to grow believers. God turns obstacles into opportunities. He takes our problems and turns them into progress. He transforms suffering into sanctification. That's what God does through our trials. He uses them for our good. Because no pain, no gain. Good, you guys were on that one. And it's because of this beautiful truth that God grows believers through trials that James can say, "Count it all joy." Right? How weird and countercultural and just kind of skewed in a way does that sentence seem? Right? You're going through trial, but count it a joy. It seems backwards. It says, "Consider your trial as a joy." That word "all" there can also be translated as pure joy or purely joy. How many times do we do that when we go through trials? Consider it as a pure joy. Now, here's what that does not mean. I think a little clarity on this is helpful. Considering a trial to be a joy or all joy or pure joy does not mean that by being a Christian, you will automatically feel joyful when trial comes in your life. That's not what this means. It's not saying that if you're saved and bad things happen that you're going to be happy about it. It's not what James is talking about here in these verses. He's also not saying that your trial, whatever it might be, is good. We go through bad things happen. Going bankrupt is not good. Cancer is not good. Relational struggle is not good. But what he's saying here is to count a trial as a joy, to consider a trial as a joy. Even though it's hard, even though it's difficult, even though I'm going through something bad, what James is getting at is to look at that trial, look at that persecution, look at that struggle and say, I'm going to count this as a joy. Because I know that God is sovereignly working in it for my good and His glory. Count it a joy, he says. We hear the word joy, and I think we first kind of just naturally think emotions and feelings, but that actually misses what is being said here. It's a command to count or to consider. It's a call to action. Look at your trial and do something. Look at your trial and think something. Look at your problem, your suffering, and even your persecution and say, this, though it's bad, though it's hard, though it hurts me, I'm going to consider it a joy. I will rejoice that God is going to use this circumstance to grow and change me, even though I'd rather not go through it. Look at the glass half full, so to speak. Consider your trial a joy despite how you feel, despite how it feels. James is not talking about a natural response that we have to hard things this morning. This is unnatural, and it takes intentionality to look at what we're going through, to stop, to pause, and think, how is God working? How can God use this? How is God going to bring about my good, as it says in Romans 8:28, and his glory? We trust that he is. James is saying, respond to your trial by looking to God's sovereignty in trial and the potential you have to grow in trial by choosing to rejoice despite how unnatural that might feel, how against the grain of our human nature that might feel. We have to count it a joy. So instead of sorrowing in trial, we sing. Instead of falling into worry, we go to worship. We choose to respond with joy, no matter how hard that might be. Choose to consider it a joy. There's two conditions here to being able to respond in this way. The first is to understand that trial is a tool in the hand of our sovereign God. We don't see God as sovereign. We don't see him as working behind the scenes in the things that we're going through. We can't look at our trials, look at the things that go on in our life and say, something good's going to come from this. God's not sovereign. We have reason to worry. Second condition to being able to count trial as a joy is that you must belong to the family of Christ. Look at verse 2 again. Count it all joy, my brothers. Who's he talking to? The church. Believers. It's believers who can count trial as a joy. Only a Christian can suffer well because we have Christ who suffered for us and teaches us to suffer well. Only a Christian can look at trial and count it as a joy. We read this in our scripture reading just a few moments ago. Paul says the same thing in Philippians chapter 3, that when we go through sufferings, we're suffering with Christ. In him we suffer, with him we experience, we fellowship in his sufferings. This morning, if you are here and you are not a believer and you are facing trial and insurmountable problems and pressures, I want you to know this. Not to scare you, but to give you hope. Know that you can't face your trials on your own. And you can't face them well, and you can't stand under the pressure of them. You need Christ to face your trials and to respond well. That's one of the hopes of being a Christian, that Christ is there with us in our struggles and in our problems and in the things we go to. He gives us the strength needed to grow under pressure. That's good news. The unbeliever has no hope in their trial, but the believer does. And it isn't the removal of trial, but the promise of God to be in that trial and to work through it in our lives. To work through it in our lives. Look at verse 3. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. James uses another version of the word testing here that's specifically used in the New Testament again for the process of gold and silver being refined. Uses it here in verse 3. The result of this testing of faith is that it produces steadfastness, or another word for that is stamina or endurance. This is a beautiful word, stamina, endurance here. It's a beautiful word. The root of this word means to remain under. To remain under. And the picture that word gives, and I want you to catch this morning, the picture of this word steadfastness or endurance or stamina, remaining under, is of somebody. It gives us this picture of somebody who has stayed under something heavy for a long time. So it's kind of implicit in this word. Somebody who's stood under something, who's remained under something for a long time. He's lifted it, he's carried it, and James says that testing in life makes you into that kind of person who's bore a weight for a long time, who can hold something up, who's used to carrying a burden, someone who has bore the pressures of life with joy and can bear more because of it. It produces steadfastness. It's as if I've remained under it and I can carry more because of what I've already carried. Stamina. Like a muscle that grows because of the resistance it faces in lifting weights, The believer that faces trial with joy is made stronger and is then able to lift heavier burdens. Remain under. Used to carrying the weight. I used to bench this much, but now I can bench that much. And if you look at me, you should know that I have no idea what I'm talking about right now. I don't lift weights, but the idea resonates to some degree. And that's the picture that it's given. I've stayed under something, I've lifted something, and now I can lift more. It produces, it builds stamina. God uses trial to enable you to lift heavier burdens down the road. Builds stamina. My two youngest siblings, most of you know this, are adopted from Ethiopia. And in the process of our family's adoption and some other mission trips that we went on, I spent about a month living in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. A little known fact about Addis Ababa is it's the same altitude as Denver, Colorado. It's up high in the mountains. It's like 70 degrees year-round. It's wonderful. So I could just live in that forever. Now, if you ever take time when you're there, if you go there, to drive up into the mountains and into the peaks, you would see people running up and down the mountain roads in the cold, thin air. Go and they'll run up the mountain. And those people that you would see running up the mountains in Ethiopia are typically Olympic runners. Training, going up the mountain. And if you know anything about the Olympics, Ethiopia is really good at the running events. All right, we got Bolt from there. They're good at it. They win. All right, if you've ever wondered why Ethiopia frequently dominates in the running events at the Olympics, it's because they train by running at an incline in thin, cold mountain air that conditions their body to run a lot better under different circumstances. They're being conditioned. They're building stamina. They're running under hard circumstances that lets them run under still hard circumstances that might not be as hard. They're able to do more because of how hard their training is. By running in harsh and difficult circumstances, these Olympians gain the endurance to run the race that matters well. Likewise, trial for the Christian produces spiritual endurance so we can face bigger problems and harder struggles down the road. Produces steadfastness. My trial today makes me strong enough to bear the trial tomorrow, and how God works through it to grow me and change me and make me look more like Christ. Produces steadfastness. Hear this morning. Your present struggle is preparation for future trials. What God is letting you go through today and using to grow you today, He's building you up to go through something tomorrow. He's preparing you. He's stretching you. He's making you look more like Christ so you can handle more weight down the road. Giving you endurance, steadfastness. Today's troubles are a training ground for tomorrow's problems. If you want to learn to handle trial, count your current trial as a joy now. I remember discipling a dear friend years ago who was going through a really difficult trial in his life. We talked about this passage and this very subject, and he was struggling at first to count his trial as a joy and to see that God could work through it. Just not responding well. By the end of it, he changed his response. He was counting it as a joy. He was looking for how God was working in it, and he made it out of the trial well. And he grew from it. The Lord sanctified him through it. Then about literally like exactly a year later, he went through something 10 times harder than what he went through in that first season. And it was like a different person went through it. He responded right. He counted it as a joy. He was able to bear the pressure. Why? Because he built up endurance by counting the last one as a joy, and God worked through it to sanctify him and to make him look more like Christ. God, through his first trial, produced endurance and stamina in him so he could remain under a heavier burden down the road, so he could run the race that mattered well with steadfastness. Trial produces endurance. You might think, Corbin, I don't know how I could ever count cancer or the loss of a loved one or this or that as a joy. You can, but it means doing as he says here and letting stamina and steadfastness produce its perfect result, its effect. Letting God work to shape you through the things you're going through now. Letting God grow you and mold you and change you so you can lift heavier burdens. Look at verse 4. Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. The purpose of enduring trial is not building endurance for the sake of becoming a macho Christian, though that would be cool. The purpose of testing and steadfastness is to cause you to be perfect and complete. Now, that word perfect doesn't mean like literally perfect. The idea of that word is whole or mature. Trial, when it's had its full effect, whenever you respond with joy and God works to sanctify you, has a maturing effect in your life. It grows you, it shapes you, it molds you, it makes you look more like Christ. Notice the condition James gives here in verse 4. He says, let steadfastness have its full effect. In other words, if we do not endure our trials and count them as a joy, we gain nothing. It's possible to waste our trials this morning. It's possible to waste them. Here's my first kind of big encouragement to you this morning. Don't waste your trials. Whatever God's got you going through, the persecution, the suffering, whatever it might be, don't waste them. Do what he says in verse 4, let steadfastness have its full effect. Respond well. Count it a joy. Let God do his work in you to make you whole and to make you mature. Count your trials a joy because no pain. Good. Next fact. The wisdom needed for trial only comes from God. This is our second point. The wisdom needed for trial only comes from God. We see this in verses 5 to 8. Verses 2 to 4, which we just looked at, are a paragraph, and verses 5 to 8 are a paragraph as well. And what connects these two paragraphs is the discussion of trial and the use of the word lack or lacking. The purpose of trial is to complete the believer that they may lack nothing, and God supplies the believer with the wisdom that they lack to face their trials. That's verse 5. Two ways that God supplies what you and I lack. He supplies maturity to those who are going through trial, and he supplies wisdom for those who are in trial and need it. James's concern in these 7 verses is our response to trial and how God supplies our every need in trial. God gives us what we need to suffer well, to be persecuted well, to go through difficult times well. James is also after helping us see that God uses trial to complete what lacks in us and to give us the wisdom and knowledge that we lack to go through trial. 2 ways in this passage, we could say, that show us how to respond to hard times. Count it a joy, go to God for wisdom. It's the 2 thrusts of this passage. Verse 5 tells us the second way that we should respond to trial, the second way that God provides for us in trial, is in the wisdom department. James says that when we are in a trial and in need of wisdom, our response should be to go to our Father and ask for wisdom. To ask for wisdom. And guess what? If we ask, James says God will freely and sincerely give us the wisdom that we seek. He liberally gives us the wisdom that we seek. And he does it without reproach or without finding fault. Look at verse 5 again with me. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. If we ask God, he freely and sincerely gives us the wisdom that we need. And again, it's without reproach, and that means without finding fault. And so we could picture it maybe like this. When we go to God in need of wisdom in the midst of our trials, he never says, I told you so. He never says, oh, well, you should have known that already. He never says, why are you asking? He never says, fine, I'll give you what you need, but don't disappoint me next time. He gives without reproach. You go to him as a child. He doesn't turn you away. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't look down on you. He gives liberally the wisdom that we need and grace. He gives freely without reproach. So you can go to him without fear of reprimand or disappointment or worry that you might be rejected. Go to him in confidence and faith, and he supplies what we need. He supplies the wisdom. In trial, when under pressure, in the midst of stress, when being crushed by suffering or bruised by persecution, respond by going to God for wisdom. Count it a joy, step 1. Go to God for wisdom, step 2. And we need to not miss in this passage that the source of our wisdom matters. The source of our wisdom in trial matters. James directs the believer who's facing any type of problem or pressure under the sun to go to God for help and for instruction. They're to go to God for wisdom. Look at what James says about wisdom elsewhere. Go over just a page, maybe 2 depending on your Bible. How big is your print this morning? This will determine how much you'll flip. James 3, and look at verse 13 with me. James is a cool book because it's kind of like Proverbs in the New Testament. A lot of wisdom for us. James 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So for James, there's 2 categories of wisdom. There's demonic, worldly wisdom, and there's wisdom that's from above that's pure and it's godly. 2 sources of wisdom, God's wisdom and the world's wisdom. Psalm 1 talks about this as well. Man who's blessed isn't getting counsel from the scoffers and mockers, but his delight is in the Lord's instruction. 2 sources of wisdom. God's wisdom is marked by purity and mercy and good fruits or results, reasonableness, mercy, impartiality, sincerity. That's what James 3 says God's wisdom is like. But the world's wisdom, if you remember what we read there, is marked by selfish ambition, jealousy, general selfishness, disorder, vileness. And James says it's not just worldly, but it's actually demonic. It comes from Satan. So naturally, when James tells believers where to go for wisdom in the midst of trial, he does not say, go to the world. He does not say, ask your lost friends for advice. Go to God. Go to where good wisdom comes from. He doesn't say, I think that self-help book on your shelf would be a good move right about now. Just ask God for wisdom. He's where good wisdom comes from. He doesn't say, seek the world's wisdom. He says, go to God who gives wisdom freely. To illustrate this, I like to kind of explain the difference between God's wisdom and the world's wisdom like this. Picture it like this. Like we have 2 wells of water in front of us. One well has been poisoned. The water's refreshing and it tastes good. And we're parched. The other well doesn't taste so good and is sometimes hard to swallow, but it's not poison and it gives you what you need in the long run. The world's wisdom, God's wisdom. One's good in the moment, one's good in the long run. There's a difference between the world's wisdom and God's wisdom. God's wisdom is pure, but it's difficult to swallow sometimes. It's uncomfortable. It's often the harder route, the route that requires self-denial, taking up our crosses. But the world's wisdom tastes good. It satisfies fast. It's like Gatorade, satisfying in the moment, but it is poison. And while it satisfies and is pleasurable, it ends up killing us in the end. Let's illustrate this just practically. Let me throw out an example of this. The world might say to the person going through a trial or a struggle with like self-esteem or something like that, the world will look at that and say, you just need to love yourself more. Love yourself more. And that sounds good and it feels good in the moment, but in the long run, that wisdom will kill you and it'll put you in a worse place than before. But God's wisdom would say to the person who's going through that, put others first. Count others as more highly than yourself. Fear God, not man. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Take your eyes off you. One of those is hard to swallow, but it leads to freeness in life. The other sounds good, feels good, satisfies the flesh, but the result is death. The result is not a flourishing life. God's wisdom helps us in the long run. So James says, go to the right well. Go to God for wisdom. Go to God whenever you're going through trial. Get his wisdom because no pain. Excellent. You guys are on it now. The wisdom needed for trial only comes from God, so stop going to the poison well of the world. He's not going to say no. He supplies what we need. Look at verses 6 and 7. Then we'll get ready to wrap up. Verse 6. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. James says to ask God for wisdom, and then he instructs us on how we should do that, how to ask, the manner in which we must approach God. Verse 6 says that we must ask in faith or trust or single-minded devotion to God and not with doubt. The word doubt here is stronger than merely questioning whether God will supply your needs. The word literally means to waver or to differentiate. It's an inward dispute. You're divided on the inside. Look at how James describes the one who doubts in verse 6. He's like a wave tossed all over by the sea or by the wind. A wave in the sea tossed all over by the wind. This isn't hesitantly approaching God, wondering if he can supply wisdom. It's going back and forth on whether we need God or not. That's the picture verse 6 gives us of the doubter. Verse 8 says that this person is double-minded and unstable. Double-minded and unstable. James literally invented a word in the Greek here. It's a new word. Came up with it himself. Double-minded literally means double-souled or twin-souled. There's like two of you inside of you, both wanting to go different ways. To be split-hearted might be a way we could say it, or having opposing desires. The biblical opposite of being double-souled would be to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, right? Split devotion versus singular-focused devotion. Instead of a full single-minded devotion to God, being double-souled is to be split down the middle between God and everything else. So the first century version of our euphemism of being on the fence. The word unstable in verse 8 gives the idea of chaos. And again, it captures the picture of being a wave tossed by the wind. This person lives a chaotic life. They're all over the place. One minute God is the answer. The next day they don't even see the need of consulting him. This is the person who's split between God and the world that James is describing here. Doug Moo calls this spiritual schizophrenia. John Bunyan called this person Mr. Facing Both Ways. Ken Hughes said this about the double-minded man. He said, in mentioning the double-minded man, James is not referring to one who is wrestling with doubt, but one who has two minds. He looks to God, yet he says he has no need. God, help me, but I don't actually need you. That's the person James is describing in verses 6, 7, and 8. We're not talking about the person caught in doubt, but the person who's caught between God and everything else. And James says that believer, that person, will get nothing if they ask for wisdom. God won't give them anything. And consequently, they won't withstand trial and they won't grow from it. This presents us, modern readers, with the question, is God the one that we fully trust, or is he just another option in our chaotic and unstable lives? Who do you trust? Where do you go to in trial and suffering and persecution? Is he just another option? Sunday morning just another option to kind of anchor your life? Or is it God? Is he the source of your help and the wisdom that you need to face trials? Go to God with single-minded faith and devotion so that his wisdom can help you joyfully endure trials and be grown through them. The wisdom that you and I need for trial only comes from God, so go to him. He's generous. He's generous. As we close, I want to remind you of another way that God has freely given his wisdom, and that is in the cross of Christ, which Paul calls the wisdom of God. In God's infinite wisdom, he gave his son Jesus to die on the cross in the place of sinners, and anyone who believes in him can be saved. In God's wisdom, he gave his son to suffer and to go through trial for you, and if you believe in him, receiving his grace by faith, you can be saved, but also be empowered by that same grace to endure trial and grow through it. Be empowered to move through and consider it a joy. Remember, it's only those who are in the family of God that can count suffering to be a joy. So today, if the Spirit's drawing you, won't you respond with faith in Jesus? It's an invitation this morning. Believe in Jesus. Trust him. Believers in here today, here's my last exhortation to you. If you're going through trial, stress, pressure, suffering, loss, would you count it as a joy today and count it and go to God for wisdom? Would you count it as a joy and go to him for the wisdom you need? Repent of seeking the world's wisdom. Examine yourself to see if you're being too sold. And if you find that you are, confess that sin to God, seek forgiveness, and go to your Father who gives wisdom to all who ask liberally. Let's pray this morning. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for the clarity that we find in it. Lord, I ask that you would be honored and glorified as we sing to you one more time, Lord, that we lift up your name, that we would, Lord, help us to apply what we've learned today, to count our trials as a joy, to go through it and let steadfastness have its full effect, Lord, that we might be grown, that we might be changed through whatever we're going through. Help us to trust your sovereignty, your goodness. Lord, help us to seek wisdom from you. Lord, to avoid worldly, demonic wisdom that puts us in worse places than we were before, but to trust you, to trust your word, to trust the wisdom that you supply. Lord, thank you for not reprimanding us when we come to you. Lord, help us to have faith, to approach you, to approach your throne boldly, and to ask when we need wisdom. Lord, I pray for the person in here who's suffering, who's going through trial right now, who's being persecuted, who has insurmountable pressures on them. Lord, I pray that you would just be a refuge to them. Lord, help them to go to you, help them to trust in you, and to rely on you. Lord, thank you for your grace and your mercy. Thank you for your son, Jesus, who saves sinners. Be with us now as we sing. It's in your name I pray. Amen.